Good evening, and welcome to this workshop of the Board of Education. Tonight, the board will discuss its 2024 legislative program. The program outlines the board's legislative priorities and guides AACPS advocacy before federal, state, and local officials. Tonight's workshop is open to the public, but no public questions or comments will be taken. This workshop is being broadcast live on AACPS TV, which can be found on Channel 96 on Comcast and Astound, and Channel 36 on Verizon. High-definition broadcasts can be seen on Channel 996 on Comcast, Channel 496 on Astound, and Channel 1961 on Verizon. The workshop can also be viewed live on AACPS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Bedell.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to have this workshop regarding our legislative program. As you all remember last year, with the exception of Eric, we discussed wanting to begin to have this conversation at a much earlier rate so that we can have multiple months to move forward with meeting and having the discussions we need to have. And rather than asking the board to take action on our legislative agenda in December, we felt that it would be better to do it earlier so we can then be ready to rock and roll come the start of the session. So today is just a part of that new process, and Grace Wilson, our legislative and policy specialist, is here to take us through this short presentation and then open it up for some discussion.
And members of the board, I'm Grace Wilson, Legislative and Policy Specialist for Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and I'm here this evening to provide an overview of the draft 2024 Board of Education of Anne Arundel County Legislative Program. I'll begin by discussing the timeline for the review and adoption of the draft 2024 legislative program. As Dr. Bedell mentioned, in the past, the legislative program has been adopted by the board in December. However, to allow for better engagement with state elected officials and the community at large, the program will now be presented to the board in September. That being said, the timeline for reviewing and adopting the 2024 draft legislative program will be as follows. At today's workshop, we'll review the draft legislative program, and at your board meeting on September 6th, the program will be back before you for adoption. The legislative program is reviewed and revised annually by AACPS staff and the Board of Education before being adopted by the board. The purpose of this document is to facilitate advocacy and engagement with elected officials on issues that are important to the board and the school system, particularly during the Maryland General Assembly legislative session. The legislative program outlines the board's positions on various issues that impact public school education and operations, including executive, legislative, and departmental actions at the local, state, and federal levels of government. There are 18 subject matters addressed in the legislative program. Examples include educational equity, funding for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, and student nutrition and health. For each subject matter, the program provides a summary of the issue, as well as a list of position statements outlining legislative, executive, and departmental actions that AACPS supports or opposes. There are many benefits of having a legislative program. First, the program establishes common positions and priorities for the Board of Education and the school system, allowing us to speak with one voice when engaging with elected officials. It also serves as a reference document for state, local, and federal elected officials, summarizing AACPS's positions on various matters. Finally, the program allows for quick and effective action and advocacy on issues of importance, particularly during the Maryland General Assembly session. As you all know, the fast pace of the legislative session does not permit significant time to review and prepare testimony. However, this document allows so to do so as efficiently as possible without having to wait for a board vote to act. This document is very much key to AACPS's effective advocacy on educational matters. Next, I'll discuss the specifics of the draft 2024 legislative program that was shared with you last Thursday, starting with the substantive changes made to the document. Language was added in support of legislative and departmental actions that encourage private pre-K providers to participate in the private-public pre-K delivery model established by the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. The draft legislative program shared with you also includes language opposing efforts by the General Assembly to shift the burden of proof to county boards of education and due process complaints regarding the provision of special education services, an issue that was considered extensively by the Maryland General Assembly during the 2023 legislative session. Next, language was included in support of initiatives that aid in the recruitment and retention of educators, particularly certified special education educators and related service professionals. Finally, outdated references to the COVID-19 pandemic were removed. During the upcoming 2024 Maryland General Assembly session commencing January 10th, AACPS will continue to focus our advocacy on two priority issues: flexibility in the school day and school year, and construction funding for pre-K expansion. With respect to flexibility in the school day and school year, we are advocating for the removal of artificial constraints on school scheduling, specifically the requirement that students be in school for both 180 days and a minimum number of student seat hours each year. The blueprint for Maryland's future is calling for innovation. Under the blueprint, students are expected to be college and career ready by 10th grade, after which they will be able to access various higher education and workforce engagement opportunities. In order to meet these requirements, we must look beyond the traditional school day. Removing this constraint will allow AACPS and local education agencies across the state the flexibility to innovate and invigorate the traditional school day and school year calendars. For example, this change would allow AACPS to reduce the use of half-days to meet the 180-day requirement, to shorten the school year, or pursue other innovative educational opportunities. Additionally, during the 2024 Maryland General Assembly session, we will continue to advocate for enhanced funding to implement the expansion of pre-K services envisioned by the Blueprint for Maryland's Future to ensure that there are sufficient capital resources to meet the needs of our youngest learners without utilizing space intended for other students. The mandated move to full-day kindergarten in 2007 was not accompanied by sufficient funding, and it took 15 years to obtain funding for and construct adequate classroom environments for those students. A repeat of this scenario runs contrary to the goals of the Blueprint, the Maryland State Department of Education, and local school systems. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss the board's 2024 legislative program with you in detail this evening. Before I take any questions, I'd like to turn it back to Dr. Bedell for any additional comments he may have.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Wilson. We appreciate it. I think what's important, and maybe I'll be able to answer a question or two, with the 180-day legislation that we're trying to pursue, we have had an opportunity to speak to a number of people. We still have support from MAID. We still have support from PZAM. My understanding, the last time I saw the state superintendent, was that they were in support of it. They were going to write a letter of support. And then one of the things that we're going to do with that piece is convene and have another meeting with Cheryl Bost with MNEA. Okay, I know MSEA. I figured I messed up, but we'll ask her to come out and meet with our team so she can reiterate some of the concerns that they may have had, and we can work on getting some answers. But the ultimate goal is, when we bring this back in January, we want to make sure that we have some concrete examples of how this will benefit all of our school systems. And I think that's something we didn't do last year. There's a lot of, I think, angst and excitement around it, but giving some concrete examples would probably allow for it to get over the hurdle. And just keep in mind, I've always said this, I generally feel like a lot of these bills are 2 to 3 years in the making before they get through. So if we can get it through this year, great. But if not, I would then be disappointed we don't get it through in year 3. So we'll continue to push forward. So that piece I wanted to address with the board, that I feel really good going into this session regarding.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Bedell, and thank you, Ms. Wilson. As typically we do at these workshops, I'm going to go via the roll call order. I would ask my colleagues to have, if you have a couple of questions, we'll start with 2 questions each. And if then we need an additional round, we'll do an additional round. So tonight, Mr. Lynn, you begin the roll call order. So the first questions are yours if you have some.
I actually have no questions at this time. I already emailed them over and got them addressed, so no questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lynn. Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for everything that you continue to do to help us with the legislative program. You mentioned initiatives for recruitment and retention. Staff's critical. That is critical. But also, what Dr. Bedell has said to us in terms of the 180 days, in terms of our schedule, that is critical as well. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it would be really nice for us to have some specific talking points. And actually, Dr. Bedell has referred to that when he talks about having the talking points with concrete examples of the need and the benefits for our students. And so it sounds like we're kind of well on our way, but we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we all are on the same page, speaking to our political allies so that we can get this done for the kids. Once again, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that. And we'll be continuing to talk about this for the next few weeks or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. Ms. Frank?
Just a quick question about the electric buses. As we start to put together costs and things like that, I believe is the electric bus requirement 2025?
I believe it's 2020. It's fiscal year 2026, which would make it
2026.
school year 2025.
Got it. So I would just be interested in sort of following that a little bit further and finding the fiscal impacts as we know them. And then there have been other concerns that have been brought to me specific to that issue about battery capabilities, recharging requirements. So just to kind of have a little bit of an understanding of what that's going to impact. And I know that's not your department, but as we are looking at how legislation affects us, have these questions been asked? And do these lawmakers know that these are the sort of requirements that they're putting on us and those types of things? And then, oh, if they don't know, they will. And then additionally, I did get some information from Mr. Stansky about some of the fiscal impacts for the upcoming school year. I'm continuously interested in what the cost, maybe not from the last legislative session, because some of those programs that they're implementing and that they've passed haven't hit us yet. So maybe go back 2 or 3 years and say, okay, well, all of these things in the last couple of sessions, or maybe the last 4 sessions, what are they rolling into? So maybe it wasn't the last session, but we are certainly seeing with Blueprint and some of the other requirements, increased cost directly associated. And your capital example was a really good one too. The increased costs that they're not funding, that we are rolling in year after year after year. And I'm interested in following that too, especially as we go through the legislative session. I don't have any particular questions, just sort of a general, this is where I'm thinking with some of the concerns that I have with the session. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you. First of all, I'm just so thrilled that we're doing this. I've brought this up the past couple of years that I felt that our process, it was just an agenda item that, we prepared for and first discussed on the night that we voted for it. And I never thought that was appropriate. So I'm really thrilled that we're digging into this now. Thank you for that. Ms. Wilson, I did give you a heads up that I had a couple questions. And so I just want to bring it out. I thank you for getting back to me. But our role on the Board of Education is to oversee education policy in the county to ensure we're representing the community. We're not representing AACPS, right? So in our position as representing the community and ensuring that we have policies that support our students, do you mind touching on, Ms. Wilson or Dr. Bedell, why it's in the community's best interest for us, for the Board of Education, to have language that indicates that we believe the burden of proof should be on the family of a special needs student rather than on the school system?
Absolutely happy to address that. This was legislation that was introduced by the General Assembly and heavily considered by them last session. It made it very far into the legislative process, which is why I recommended specific language in opposition to this. I feel that it's in the best interest of the community because this shifting the burden of proof to the county boards of education in due process complaints regarding the provision of special education services has the potential to have a significant financial and operational impact to AACPS. If the burden of proof is shifted, it's anticipated that there will be a lot more families bringing legal action against AACPS, which could result in increased legal fees and costs attributed to staff involvement in the hearing and preparation and participation. It's estimated that the average expenditure for legal services for special education hearings could increase to $15,000 per hearing. And that being said, increased litigation costs for the school system is contrary to the public interest, as it would divert funding from other school system priorities to providing those legal services.
Okay.
And if I can just add one piece to that, it's also an assumption that we're already guilty. So you already have to come out and now we have to spend an inordinate amount of money on cases that we shouldn't be spending money on. But with this particular piece, it's an assumption already that you're guilty before proven innocent rather than you're innocent and then you need to prove that, you have a chance to defend yourself. So that's the reason why we also have a significant concern with this particular piece.
So the board taking this position is, in your opinion, not stating that we are not in full support of our special needs students and ensuring that they get the education that they deserve.
Absolutely. What we're saying is that in traditional legal proceedings, if you bring the complaint, you have the burden of proof.
Right.
This is contrary to how the American legal system traditionally operates. And there's been a Supreme Court ruling that's upheld that the burden of proof is properly on the parents who are bringing the complaint.
Okay, that's helpful. I thank you for clarifying. And I hope you understand the question. I appreciate you getting it to us. Now, the other one, again, our responsibility is overseeing the public schools of AACPS over not the operations, but the policy. And why are we concerned about families that seek education alternatives and whether or not they receive support? If I understand, we don't want money coming from our school system to support educational alternatives, but if the per pupil funding is not impacted on us, then why do we care? Because I know I've known countless teachers and principals in our public schools who have children in alternative education, because every family is responsible for making the decision that's best for them.
First, I think any money that's spent on non-public or private education is money that's diverted from public education, first and foremost. Additionally to that, non-public schools are not subject to the same legal requirements as public schools, such as special education and teacher certification requirements. Additionally, the vast majority of non-public school programs are not linked to state and federal student performance or accountability measures. Support for public education is thus a better investment for the taxpayer, as their public schools are publicly accountable for every education dollar that's spent. And furthermore, given the significant investment in public education called for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is $3.8 billion over 10 years, it's in the best interest of the state and the public to ensure there's sufficient funding to make the necessary investment in public education.
All right. I mean, I still have some thoughts about this, and I'll, be considering things, and I'd like to have a conversation. Dr. Bedell, I agree on not impacting the students that we have. The part that I have a little bit of concern with is that funding going to alternatives necessarily means taking money from the school system, because our interest is the investment in our students, right? We're not a corporation that's trying to profit, right? Or trying to, eat up every dollar we can. We're just concerned that we have the funding that we need to educate the students of AACPS, whether it's 80,000 or 60,000 or whatever it is. But I appreciate you taking the time to
course.
respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corkadell?
Thank you, and thank you so very much, Ms. Wilson and Dr. Bedell, and everybody else that stands behind you that's not necessarily here present. I think I first want to thank you for us making the necessary adjustments for our process, and I think AACPS is going to be better represented as a whole. If you look at the current MABE timeline, when the new legislative committee takes in, which is a representation of each and every single district for that one, that takes place after the conference, and then they are expected to vote to represent their district and their district's interest as a whole, and look at the state as a whole of what that impact and implication is. I always felt that we were a little underrepresenting ourselves by not providing that opportunity for our legislative representatives on that committee to already have had the benefit of this discussion and a better understanding of its implications. So thank you guys very much for that. And I think we're moving that in that direction in education as a whole. And once again, very proud Anna Rundle's taking the lead on that. But there are hints and indications, being that the blueprint is now a year-round committee endeavor, virtually, and same goes with federal government, and even in the pre-files of legislation have become more and more common. The necessity for us as stakeholders representing our folks and our students, having those seats at the table means that we need to know what direction we're in. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction, and appreciate that and serving as leadership. I wasn't going to make any comments, but I do know that I was one of the folks who sat down with some of the legislators as it relates to burden of proof. And one of the other challenges, in addition to what you mentioned, Dr. Bedell, and what Ms. Wilson mentioned, is the integrity of the system of the balance. So, I think we would almost be better served to create a legal fund, a legal vehicle, because it's my understanding that some of this frustration stems from the fact that the parents do not feel that they have enough resources to pursue action. And so I think that should not be of our interest. That should be of a bigger, broader community-based program of support, just like we provide for other classes of interest. And so I hope that maybe they can take this in a slightly different direction, that recognizes that family could not be benevolently, independently represented when the same person that is sought to do our work and come to our conclusions would then have to wear a different hat of defense and do it benevolently. And I just think that's a burden that should not be placed on any district or any individual staff member. Rather, we need to expand some of the legal service access to legal services for our families in general, so that they can be better advised. Because I'm also under the impression that once they understand the law and are explained the law from a professional, independently, that often there's not a legal issue. It's more of a process and how we can be more responsive, which each district already has a duty and obligation to do. So, but that is hard to read and understand, and it is very complex. And so I think it's going to be our burden too, to as a state and all school board members, is to be well versed enough in all of these issues to be able to speak to them and even have an example and a story or two. Stories go a long way. So thank you so much for everything. And I'm looking forward to seeing our flexibility of school days mature. And I can tell you, I field tested in a conversation this past weekend with some other schools in some different states that we were looking for opportunities of CTE, and it was, the concept was well embraced as an opportunity that no one's been thinking about. And so thank you so much for bringing that to us, because I think we can soar as it relates to meeting our obligation to our students, and they can soar in turn. Thank you so much.
So just to respond to one piece that you brought up, just around the burden that parents having to advocate legally on behalf of their special education concerns for their children. This is where I'm hoping that we'll be able to build some relationships with the business sector to be able to raise money. So one of the things we did in my previous system was we were able to get a pretty significant grant that we use in our Justice in the Schools initiative, which allowed for us to partner with legal aid, and they provided free support for families that couldn't afford it to advocate, whether it was being evicted or they were trying to navigate the legal system with taxes, or trying to navigate working with the school district around some of their special education concerns. And so, I mean, what you said just reminds me of that Justice in the Schools initiative to kind of help support families. So that's something that I'm hoping over time, as we begin to build stronger relationships with corporations, and Mr. Dickerson and I have been having some conversations about, there's a lot of people that do a lot of business with the school district that should be doing more than just business with the school district, that really could help with these kind of initiatives. So I just wanted to validate with what you brought to the table there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Shawhan.
Yes, thank you as always for your work around this, and in getting the priority areas to us this early. It is a welcome change. One item that we did ask for in the past that I know doesn't rise to the level of being like a priority issue this year, but it still is a thorn in our side, is the whole 20-day time horizon for background checks. And this isn't just for new hires that we have to dig up every last individual they ever worked with since the age of 18, but it's my understanding that this also hinders us with regard to promotions, that we have to go through this process again. So if you're, a school-based staff, you're being moved from being around children on the daily to, say, a central office position where you'd be around children almost never, that you still have to go through this 20-day background check and dig up every last reference and wait the 20 days. And so from not just a recruiting standpoint, but a retention standpoint, this is a terrible way to function. I feel like we have our hands tied behind our back. And I know that we've asked the Maryland General Assembly for relief around this issue a couple times, and for whatever reason that hasn't occurred. But I tell you what, like if someone asked me to go back and like list every last person I'd worked under since the age of 18, I'm not even sure I could recall all of that information. So I know it doesn't rise to the level of the priority focus areas, which I think are valid and wonderful, but it's something that we still need to bug the Maryland General Assembly for relief around. So it's not a question, it's just like, hopefully we can add that to the things when we see people, we can remind them of this can be corrected with stroke of pen. Yeah, but thank you. No more questions or no other comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Dent.
Ms. Wilson, as always, I think that the initiatives that you put forth are up at the forefront. And my question is really maybe more for Dr. Bedell than it is for you. Under the area that talks about compulsory attendance and student discipline, my concern is, as it has been for quite some time now, is the legislation that was passed that talked about, I think it was age 5. Now we're talking about pre-K and pre-K. Is there any way for us, number one, to address that in our position that talks about pre-K? it talks about it in the narrative, but I think the law is specific about age 5 to 18. Now that's part one. Part two is student discipline. So it is my opinion that the disciplinary and restorative practices that is inside of a school is left although there's a law, it leaves the school vulnerable with what they can do to find alternative pathways for our students within AACPS. Perfect example is the children are having the alternative going to alternative school, but looking at other alternatives are not available for those students. It's you have a disciplinary problem, then you're expunged, suspended, and then you're on your way to a pathway or the pipeline to prison. So I think there has to be a way for us to talk to Maryland General Assembly, put the document, the stats, the data, as Dr. Bedell liked to say, forth that allows the school system to take responsibility for a way or a measurement on where we can get restorative practice. That's why I say it's my opinion. The second part of that question for Dr. Bedell is where is your position on the restorative practice and student discipline as it pertains to AACPS?
Yeah, I think my position has been pretty static. I believe in restorative justice and trying to help rehabilitate behavior. And I think we'll continue to work with our schools on that matter. As far as discipline is concerned, and I've said this in a number of community meetings, I'm not going to allow 5 to 7% of kids to hold classes hostage, right? If we've tried everything to support these students, at some point we have to say enough is enough. And, I think that's where we also have to take a look at what is it called? Our new department. We renamed it and I just can't think of it. We don't call it the alternative department anymore.
No.
The Office of Educational Options and School Climate.
So part of what we're trying to do within that division is to create some more options that can better support our students. And some of it may mean taking a look at some virtual school options if the regular environment isn't working, not just the only two options are Moss and Phoenix. So we're going to also work to redesign, and we're starting at what those sites will look like and how we will be able to provide more targeted support for our students. Part of our problem is both of them, to me, they're trying to be everything to everybody. Mm-hmm. And when you have 4 or 5 different types of programs in one school, you're not going to service these kids and get them the help and the rehabilitation that they need. So that's part of what we're doing over this next year in that division, to really look at a portfolio of options to help support our students and put them in the best position where they can be successful.
I love it. I'm glad I asked the question.
I just can't. I don't know why I can't remember the Office of Educational Options and School Climate.
As long as you changed it from alternative education, I am happy.
Yeah, we did change it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of things. First of all, again, thank you. This is terrific. I'm so much happier with the schedule for all the reasons that many of my colleagues have reiterated. I think we're able to give the thought that is necessary to this. And I'm grateful for the questions that all my colleagues have raised. I think they're really valuable for us and for the public. And I actually was thinking both when Ms. Ellis raised her question about the special education situation and Ms. Corkadell's comments as well. I mean, there are sort of foundational issues with special education. We know that. It's one of the great unfunded mandates of all time. And I think it is worth continuing to speak with our own General Assembly about just what's really at stake here. As has been noted, the equity issues around it are profound. Families often, I've heard plenty of stories of families giving up entire retirements and so on to advocate. And it's just simply not fair that some families can and some families can't. And so I think this is a bigger issue than us. And I think the state and obviously the federal legislature also needs to understand that, you know, we're playing with monopoly money here in terms of, you know, figuring out where the actual cost is going. And so I think, you know, as we think about this, we need to, personally, this is just my view, I think we need to communicate to our legislators that this is, you know, this is the surface of a much bigger and deeper issue that has been ongoing for a very, very long time. Similarly, the questions around restorative justice and so forth. Personally, I think restorative justice can work extremely well. I've seen it work very well, but it is extremely labor intensive and it takes real training and experience to do it right. And it can't be done well, in my view, when a staff is just stretched too thin. And again, we just have to be realistic about this in our discussions. I'm very encouraged to hear the new naming and presumably envisioning of what possibilities are out there for our students for whom the current typical school setting is not working, because it's always wrong, in my opinion, to simply label a child a problem. None of our children should just be problems. They are our students. And so those are just some added thoughts that I think I'm delighted with the priorities that we have laid out. I just want to add that I think some of them reflect these broader issues, as does, for example, the funding of the pre-K. We need real funding. I was just hearing another story yet today on the news about just how expensive and hard to come by high quality daycare is across the country. And good pre-K, we know, has a profound impact on the way a child is set up for school. And so we can't wait 15 years to have these slots available. Our students need them as soon as possible. So, and I think the 180 day is a win. I mean, I just think parents alone, the idea that the early dismissals might go away is enough to have a party in the streets in this county. So for working parents. So
Listen, I hear it every time we have an early one. I hear it when I go home.
Yep.
I'm not set this schedule. I just got here.
So I think that's all to the good. So so that concludes my comments. I really didn't have any additional questions, Dr. Bedell.
Just one more. So, Ms. Ellis, I know we have probably about 2 weeks or so. So let's hop on the phone because I have some thoughts too about what you brought up. I mean, of course, I think you know my position on that matter definitely aligns with some of her responses, but you said a few things that I want to kind of get a better understanding of. So thank you for bringing that up. And we have 2 weeks to talk through it still. All right.
All right. Do just a quick show. Are there others with additional questions or comments? Okay, then I think that concludes tonight's session. Thank you again, Ms. Wilson. Much appreciated. And we will take this up for a vote on December 6th. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Better schedule this year.